do any intensive type of development without having a model made. And in the architectural rules, the committee is allowed to call for a model, even for a private house, if they're not quite sure the way it's going to turn out.
Votre père n'a pas vu la maquette ici.
And of all the major developments down here, we've had these models made, and they really do help. They help for the architectural committee to decide what changes are necessary, if any. And it also gives people the impression that they know something more about the coast. They know what it's going to look like in a year or two. What we want to do is to try, in this development, to provide the purchaser here with everything he needs. To build his house if he wants us to build it, to furnish it for him if he wants us to do that, to plan his garden and run his garden for him.
We are about here, C5,
C5 is over there.
C5 is over there, so we're
standing
C4.
right in front of C4.
C4,
So
yes,
right
I
here.
see.
Yes, I see. So this, we're on the top one now.
Yes, now we're on
the top one.
Now we're on this top level, which is where...
noisy now, don't you?
The construction which will go with this tourism must justify industries, people coming to work here. They were all originally farmers or cattle breeders in the area and were scratching a living out of a land which was practically barren. Now, with tourists as a reason for the income of money, the local population have regular salaries, their means of communication have improved, that is, they all have now scooters and cars, they dress better, they have electricity in their houses and many modern facilities, which I honestly don't think could have been dreamt of before this project was started. When I came here the first time, the road from Olbia here was totally untarmacked the whole way. One could hardly get here except by jeep and by foot. Now the road is tarmacked to about 2 miles of Calavolpe. The roads are a problem for us because it's a question of getting the government to build these roads so that we don't lose a year in the development. We guarantee water, electricity, telephone, roads, and sewerage. And on our own land, there is the obligation to put the telephone and electric cables underground. The fact that people are now living and working in this area means that there will be the development of new municipalities, new towns, new villages. We are planning on building small workshops for artisans, for furniture, materials, ceramics, all this sort of thing. The workmen now have a regular income, they have work all year round. It is a different work, it is a work which I think even themselves are surprised to find how quickly they can learn. Sardinians run a new food store which provides for the whole of the Costa Smeralda.
Fuori di sedano 24 scatole da mezzo chilo.
800, signor Terra.
Bene, grazie. Metti là che la portiamo via. No?
Gli spaghetti, mettili là.
Mettili sopra.
No, lì che sopra quelle case gli spaghetti. Lì.
Mettili qua.
Se non ci sta a satellitare la stessa pensare, aiuto.
Ecco, bisogna andare a bordo con la barca là.
One of the services provided would be taking food out to a yacht if they should need it.
Voglio adesso pigliare la spesa, sì.
Cosa vuole per domani?
Vieni, fila là.
Polli.
Prosciutto. E un po' di pollo arrosto. Sì.
We got a study made of all the tourist harbors in Spain, Greece, France and Italy. Went round asking harbor masters, sailors, harbor organizations, captains, all the sort of technical points as to what should be found on a quay. That is, for example, fuel, water, whenever one needs it, and with sufficient pressure so as to be able to fill a large yacht. When the harbor was finished and the yachts came in for the first time, we could hardly believe that these months of very hard work were all over, and that finally the port was occupied by such a large fleet of really lovely yachts. We had the impression that it was slightly unreal. We had worked on the harbor for many months without ever seeing the sign of a yacht. And suddenly, within 24 hours, the quay was completely full up. So were all the other floating pontoons in the bay. And in fact, there were yachts anchoring in the middle of the bay. This was a really deep surprise, and I don't think any of us really appreciated its significance until well after the season was finished.
The arrival of such a large section of the smart Mediterranean yachting set gave a dazzling launching to the Costa Smeralda enterprise. It's too early yet to call the scheme a financial success, but it certainly looks like a very good investment.
Qui m'ont beaucoup touché. Nous avons fait de très grands efforts pour que vous puissiez arriver dans un vrai port à Costa Smeralda.
There could hardly be a scheme more European, more Western in its conception than this enterprise in Sardinia. And yet the man who's bringing it about is claimed by millions to be the direct descendant of Muhammad. Luxury, seclusion, seeing a scheme devised with such imaginative insights into the needs and tastes of the European smart set, it is impossible not to ask whether the Aga Khan, despite his spiritual office, is not really a Westerner himself.
Ever since I was old enough to understand a little bit of one's own surroundings, I have always felt much closer to the East, and until the day I die, I will always have these same feelings. I learned English and French long before I learned any Oriental language, but for years and years and years I have been studying Islam, studying the East. I mean, if you asked me questions about the Christian church, I would be very weak. I am very far away at heart from the West. At the same time, I think that in many cases it's wise for the Imam to have a certain amount of space in time and distance, so that when he goes back to the areas which he has visited a year earlier or 2 years earlier, he gets a really clear picture of the transformations that are taking place. Generally, I try to do a tour of each area once every 2 years. When the Imam is there, most of the members of the community have at least half a day off every day, if not the whole day. It's nearly always a holiday. When they close their shops, they usually decorate the institutions when the Imam arrives, decorate the airports. It's really a time of festivity.
The question remains, which is the real Aga Khan? The Oriental, the Imam of the Ismaili Muslims, or the rich young Parisian, the racegoer, the Harvard graduate, the man behind the Costa Smeralda? It would be easy enough to sum him up as a man of two worlds, but it wouldn't be true. He doesn't seem to take on a different personality when he moves from one to the other. In Paris, Or in a Pakistan village, he seems to be exactly the same conscientious, sympathetic, determined young man. If East and West have ever met, they have met here. He's not a man of two worlds. Perhaps the best description of him is that he's a man of the world.
The gynecological patients, and to know that your bed occupancy has risen considerably therefrom. I would have thought that the best person to award the prizes would be the chairman of the board of management, until such a time as the nurses include African and European trainees. At that time, we could perhaps ask the Minister of Health to perform the ceremony. Alaline, s'il te plaît. I'm usually up around 6 in the morning, and I try to work from around 7 onwards until around 10 o'clock in the morning, independently of the secretaries. Then the secretary will come in at 10, and we will work until around 11:30, 12. Then I will have appointments which will cover an enormous field of problems. And then lunch, usually at home. I don't go out much. I do not like going out very much indeed. I would have more appointments in the afternoon, usually work in the evening with the secretary again, and then in the evenings it depends entirely. Either I stay at home or I will go out with friends. But generally speaking, in the last 2 or 3 years I've hardly been out at all, because if you start early in the morning you really can't keep going until 4 the next morning. De demander à Guirlande, le capitaine, s'il a trouvé des marins pour le bateau qui est en location cet été, pour le Tara. Hein? Voilà. Merci.